The Unmarked Room. Daniel Miller had never expected to inherit anything, let alone a massive, decaying mansion in the middle of nowhere. Ashcroft Manor belonged to a great uncle he'd never met, a man whose name was barely mentioned in the family. When the lawyer had called, Daniel had thought it was a scam. But the paperwork was real, and now he stood at the foot of the crumbling old house that time had all but forgotten. He parked his car on the gravel driveway, staring up at the ivy-covered walls. The place looked like something out of a Gothic novel, towering, dark, and full of secrets. The roof sagged, windows were clouded with grime, and the garden was a mess of overgrown weeds and wild flowers that had long since taken over what might have once been a well-manicured landscape. "Guess this is mine now," he muttered to himself, trying to summon some excitement. But all he felt was unease. The front door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a vast foyer with a grand staircase curving up to the second floor. A musty smell hit him immediately, a mix of dust, mold, and old wood. His footsteps echoed as he crossed the marble floor, his breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. Everything inside was covered in white sheets, old furniture, portraits, and even the chandelier above looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Sunlight streamed weakly through the filthy windows, casting long shadows across the floor. It was clear the house had been abandoned for years, left to decay along with whatever memories it held. Daniel wandered through the first floor, past the parlor, dining room, and what looked like a library, all of them in a state of disrepair. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, maybe some hidden treasure that would explain why a distant relative had left this place to him. But everything just seemed old. Forgotten? It wasn't until he climbed the staircase to the second floor that he found something strange. The hallway was lined with closed doors leading to what were probably bedrooms, but one door, at the very end, stood slightly ajar. Something about it seemed off. Unlike the other rooms, this one didn't look like it had been touched by time. There was no dust, no cobwebs, and the wooden floor beneath his feet looked almost polished. Curiosity tugged at him. Pushing the door open, Daniel stepped into a small, perfectly preserved study. It was like walking into another era. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with old leather-bound volumes, and a large oak desk sat in the center of the room, neatly arranged as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Papers, pens, and what looked like a vintage clock were all in place, untouched by time.
On the desk, an open journal caught his eye. He picked it up, flipping through the yellowed pages, each one filled with tight, meticulous handwriting. As he skimmed the entries, a chill ran down his spine. The journal belonged to his great-uncle Robert, but the entries weren't just ordinary musings or records of daily life. They were notes, detailed accounts of strange experiments. Time is not a fixed point, one entry read. It can be bent, manipulated. The room is the key, but every journey exacts a price. Daniel frowned, reading on. His great-uncle wrote about this room as if it held some sort of power, a way to travel through time. The experiments grew more and more bizarre, discussions of wormholes, time loops, and alternate realities. It sounded like the ramblings of a madman, but the further Daniel read, the more convincing it became. Then there was a final entry that stopped him cold. October 12, 1968. I have finally perfected the method. The room is ready. Tomorrow, I will make the final journey. If I do not return, let this be a warning to anyone who follows. The past is not what it seems. Daniel dropped the journal on the desk, his mind racing. October 12, 1968. His great-uncle had disappeared on that date. According to the lawyer, he had never been seen again. A creeping sense of dread settled over Daniel as he looked round the room. It was as if the walls were closing in on him. The air suddenly thicker, heavier. He glanced at the clock on the desk. It wasn't just old. It was ancient, its hands frozen at exactly 11:32. But as he stared, the second hand twitched. It started to move. Before he could process what was happening, the room itself seemed to shift. The air shimmered, and the books on the shelves blurred, their spines warping and distorting. The floor beneath him felt unsteady, like he was standing on the edge of something that didn't exist yet. He stumbled back, but the door to the hallway had disappeared, replaced by a wall of solid wood. Heart pounding, Daniel tried to steady himself. This had to be a trick of the light, his mind playing games with him in the airy atmosphere. But when he turned back toward the desk, it wasn't the same anymore. The room had changed. The once neat desk was now covered in dust and cobwebs, the clock's hands spinning wildly. The air was colder, and the light that had once streamed through the window was now dim, as if the sun had disappeared altogether. Daniel backed up, his mind racing, trying to find some rational explanation. But deep down, he knew. His great-uncle's journal hadn't been a delusion. The room had somehow shifted, bent time, just as Robert had written, and now, he was trapped in whatever strange place his great-uncle had warned about. He was no longer in the present. Part 2. As Daniel struggles to understand what has happened, he must unravel the mystery of the room's power and figure out how to escape before time itself consumes him.